Hey folks, thanks for joining me today. I thought this was a great opportunity to talk about the Simpson Mustache. And the Simpson Mustache is a really unique piece of archaeology. It existed for a very small period of time in a very small location, and there are very, very few of them. Yet it has always raised a lot of questions. And just so you know, this entire video is nothing but speculation. I don't really know. I don't think anybody knows or really will know because there's so few of them and so little information about them. I don't think that we will ever truly know, but we've got some facts written on the whiteboard, some things that we've known, and then also some ideas that have come in from followers on social media that we can discuss. And I think if we look at some of the things we do know and then draw on some experience from primitive building and hunting, maybe we can come up with an idea or two that sounds halfway decent. So first on the list, I would say, what are some things that we do know about the Simpson Mustache? Some sources say, Central Florida up to Georgia, maybe some have been found there, but we also know that people did travel around quite a bit. But also we know that one source says that only 14 have been found, and maybe those are 14 properly documented, maybe. Then another source says less than 100, and then another source says about 40 or 50. Either way, it's very few of these things have ever been found. In fact, most of what you hear is there's not really much for broken pieces that are found also, except there is a little note in that, and I don't know much about it, but in the overstreet here, which we'll refer to, it does mention that there's 40 to 50 of them found, including broken ones are known. But it goes on to say here that only about 40 to 50, including broken ones, are known. Lateral edges were not resharpened and show extreme edge wear that extends over and into the dorsal and ventral blade faces on most examples. But there's something to be looked at here too as what could be, and it's hard to interpret something from a book, but one of the things that I would consider is that extreme edge wear that extends over into the dorsal and ventral blade faces, that may actually be an intentional dulling of the blade in itself. And the fact that there is no resharpening and very few examples of broken ones tells us an interesting story as well. So within some other things that we know, okay, so realistically, these are not large points or blades. They're quite small. 2 to 3 inches seems to kind of be the sweet spot for these. It also seems to be that they were made from raw stone, and also, according to the overstreet, a late Paleo 12,000 to 8,000 years before present time. And I think that that's a pretty broad time frame, and it was probably neck down really tight, but they're not exactly sure how to assign a specific date to it. Again, because there's so few of these. I don't think this was something that actually spanned 4,000 years. It was probably more of a very, very short window, especially because there's so few of these. And so I do kind of think that there's a real possibility that this is like a 1 to 2 generation sort of gig here because there are so few of them. But if they are of primarily raw stone and kind of in association with the Simpson bull tongue shape, then I can see where that's where the Simpson name may kind of come from. And then if it's out of raw stone, now you are looking at a really early archaic or a paleo style point before they started heat treating rock. And I say point loosely, I don't think it's a point at all. But getting back to the size, I think if we saw some larger examples, then I would say that would be a great idea that these were used as knives or utility tools in some way. However, you don't see resharpening, and that is really, really important. Because as a guy that uses this stuff all the time, resharpening stone tools is crucial. You don't make a stone tool, use it, and then not resharpen it unless it's a simple blade core style of flake. So if you're going to go through all the effort of bifacing and napping a tool out to use, you don't use it for a few times and then discard it. You resharpen it, but they are not resharpened. So the idea of using these at knives now that's starting to be kind of a far reach for me, because knives are something that are used heavily and resharpened heavily. And aside from some little broken tips and ears and stuff like that, these aren't really found in any numbers where they're broken. If they were found almost always broken, then I would say maybe they were used as some sort of projectile, but it's quite the opposite. It seems like the ones that are found are in whole condition rather than ones that were broken. So if they were used, then they likely were not thrown or shot. Now, think about the dates that we're talking about here too. Early Archaic to Paleo, this is far before bow and arrow technology. This is during atlatl technology. It's not even close to bow and arrow technology in North America. This is purely atlatl technology. And when you throw a large atlatl thrown spear and it's got a projectile on the end, very high likelihood of breaking. That is why many atlatl points are so robust. And these having those pronounced ears on either side that curl back in, those would be very easily broken on the ground and rocks and sticks and debris, and that is not something that is commonly found. And so I would look at that and say, not a knife because it's not resharpened, not a projectile because it's not broken. Now, because there were so few found, and let's just go with the top number, under 100. Does that mean under 100 were ever made? Absolutely not. But think about the amount of people that were around back then and then making them for one reason or another. The reason that there were so few made is because they clearly didn't serve a purpose that was important to the survival or the lifestyle of these early people. If this was a really important tool, you would see a lot of them being made and used and worn and resharpened and broken. We see that with almost every other artifact that we know serves a real purpose. Yet all those things are lacking in the Simpson Mustache. And then maybe one of the last things that we know is that they are from a very specific region, and this to me would dictate that it was a very small group of people, perhaps a tribe or a clan of people, or a group of people within that tribe that were using these. So maybe not 14 people, but maybe several hundred people, maybe even several thousand people, more than likely, over a period of, who knows, it could be 10 years, it could be 1,000 years. We're not exactly sure. Either way, there's very few of these out there, and they're not widespread geographically. So that tells us that these were not something that was being traded. It wasn't something that people were taking and migrating to other areas. I don't know that I've ever heard of one being found anywhere outside of that Swanee River region. So that tells you it's somebody that's staying relatively close to home. And that's an important fact to consider as well. All right, so we talked about the things that maybe we kind of know. Now let's talk about some ideas that came in on social media. One of the things you first look at is maybe a gut hook, right? So we see that in modern knives, and honestly, that's one of the first things that I kind of thought of in that initial idea that pops in your head. Be like, well, that's kind of neat. Maybe you could use that as, a zipper to open something up, whether you're splitting legs or opening up the guts. But also remember that stone isn't going to hold that edge really long term, especially when you're zipping through hide and hair. And you might get a couple good uses out of it, but we're not seeing any resharpening within those hooks. Like I said, so I would say if this was actually used for that all the time, like if it was hafted in reverse or whatever, and used as a gut hook, then you would probably see some resharpening within those hooks, and that doesn't seem to be the case. So really you'd get a couple uses out of it at best. So then the next one is a projectile that limits penetration. That's kind of a funny thing to think about, especially when you're considering the atlatl. So you'd be talking about specifically trying to hunt something and then limit penetration to like stop it. But also remember, it's not like they're this long and you're putting these ears on it to get in there far enough to do damage but not penetrate all the way through. Penetration is kind of an issue within itself. There's other ways to limit penetration, say like the stemmed points that we've talked about in other videos and books, where you make a larger point which slows down penetration, but it still goes in to the body cavity and does a lot of damage. With those pronounced hooked ears, it would absolutely stop penetration, like straight up stop. And I could maybe come up with a couple ideas that you might want to use, like say on rabbits, or because you want that blunt force trauma as well as laceration. But if they were really effective for that, I think you would see a lot more of them. But also, you wouldn't really need to make those out of stone. If you were going to hunt rabbits, that's something you could make out of bone and antler fairly readily. In fact, I would just make like a barbed antler point or a barbed bone point. Get through them, barb them, hook them on, but stone is going to break a lot easier than some of those bone projectiles. So if it was, maybe it was even an idea that they used for a little while, but the fact is you're not finding them broken. And if they were randomly found in broken pieces in a hunting context, I mean not around a campsite or rivers or whatever, just out in the wilderness, then I would say they probably were used for hunting. But that doesn't seem to be the case. And if you're not... It's like if you ask me, you want to build a point to go hunt rabbits with, I really wouldn't spend the time to build those stone points. I would just use some either crappy stone points or a barbed antler or bone point, or honestly, just blunts, which you've seen me use in my videos quite frequently. So I don't think making them for small game or rabbit hunting really makes a lot of sense. Is it plausible? It's plausible. I think it would work. You kill a rabbit, absolutely you would. And then as far as hunting big game, because there's such a small point, you're just not getting in there far enough to do any real damage. And then also, if you're going to run into some big game with this, you're going to end up breaking those ears off. And again, that's not something that you see. You're not finding these points with the ears shorn off. Some other good thoughts were stuff like the modern turkey points that are wide that might catch something, or points for bird hunting or frog gigging, that kind of stuff. Again, I think you're going to see a lot more wear on these, or a lot more breakage, I should say, on the ears. As far as gigging frogs, I don't see that being really beneficial. At that point, I'd rather take cane and just split it out and make a traditional frog gig. That way, it's plausible, I suppose. As far as hunting birds with them, maybe, but if you're throwing this into flocks of birds, again, I think it's the same thing with the small game. You're going to see broken pieces. Turkeys in general, if you're going through the effort of hunting turkeys with an atlatl and you're trying to hit them in the head, probably not the most efficient way to go about that. If you hit one in the head, would it kill it? Sure. But I would also look at it and say, I think it's going to be far easier to snare turkeys than it would be to hunt them. And that's something we've talked about in some turkey hunting stuff previously, that primitively hunting turkeys with stone points is kind of a really difficult thing to do. Especially for the amount of meat you get off of it, you're kind of further ahead to trap and snare turkeys. So to make a point to put on the end of an atlatl and throw it at a turkey's head, probably a really, really, really low chance of success on that. And then kind of circling back to the original thing with the gut hook, but then also mentioned hafting it in reverse, where the point is actually the part that's hafted, and then the two mustache pieces are exposed and then used as like an ulu or a knife or something. And I would say there's some plausibility to that, and I thought about that as well. But I think you would also then see examples that the that the point was not actually pointed, that it may have just come down. So it would have just been like a straight haft that had some mustaching at the top that could have been used for that. But see, the thing is, these things are quite small, so you're looking at something that's only going to be about this wide, even at the curls. So there's not a lot of material there to work with. And so if it really was some sort of ulu or knife, then I think you would see a lot larger bases where you could actually use that as a tool, because these are quite small. Okay, so now all of that being said, I want to reiterate that I have no idea what they're used for. I really don't. I've got an idea, and that's probably what you've been waiting to hear. And I could be completely wrong on all of it. I could be completely wrong on all the things that we've discussed so far, because there's such little information out there about them. In fact, if you know a lot about them or know somebody that does and they want to get in contact with me and let me know, I would love to hear it. There's such an interesting piece, but because there are so many, they're not really broken and they're not resharpened. I think that tells us something. And if we think about it outside of the box, rather than looking for what they're used for, we start looking at all the things, well, they're probably not used for this, which we've gone over that list, and then maybe start thinking about how humans are in general. So, this is the part that it probably disappoints a lot of people. Think about how humans are. Sometimes they make stuff and it doesn't have as big of a purpose as you think, and then other times the purpose isn't necessarily for a utilitarian use. And you know what I honestly think that a Simpson mustache is for? I think it's this. And the reason that I say that, as simple as that is, be like, why would they make a pendant out of it? And I don't know that it's necessarily just a pendant, but remember that people back then, and actually all through antiquity, were very specific on the points that they made, that they hunted with. Okay, so especially if you've read the book, The Secrets and Science of the Atlatl, we talk about it in there, but this is a pretty widely known fact that people didn't make stone projectiles and then say, oh, well, today I'm going to make a Dalton, and then I'm working on this one, and it didn't work out real good, so I'm going to make a big Sandy out of it instead. It's like, no, they were very specific about what they made. So geographically and time frames really dictated what they made. They didn't make a corner notch today and a side notch tomorrow. They were very specific about what they made. That was like a part of their culture's identity, was the point that they made. And there's an evolution of that you can follow. And so we do see that there's almost like a trademarking of their tribe or culture or society or whatever it is that you want to call it. So we know that that exists at that time. And I look at something like the Simpson mustache and I say it looks to me, because it's so geographically isolated and especially time-wise with what it's made from, and it does not show resharpening. However, if you were going to have a pendant, wouldn't you actually doll it up quite a bit? So that would be the excessive wear. It would be you're grinding it to take the edges off. Now, if you really came down to it, also think about the possibility that it could be used as a survival, like a last line of survival knife. Okay? Imagine this. Hypothetically, you belong to a specialized hunting party in the area, but if you get separated from everybody or find yourself spending a night or two out, maybe you don't have some of your gear, you've always got this. And this right here is almost like a little multi-tool that can be used for all kinds of little things, whether it's working out a fireboard for friction fire, maybe it's gutting a fish, maybe it's processing a rabbit. You know, you have all these different surfaces, but more importantly than that, it's like if you're out somewhere and you run into somebody, This right here is your identification. Now, am I saying that that's what it is? Absolutely not. But because they're not resharpened, meaning that they're not reused very much, but they probably were used some, so they were either dulled or they were used, but then not used all the time. But then also it seems to be, and I could be wrong on this, but from what I've read, they're found in the Swanee River or around the Swanee River, which would again say that's a very isolated group of people, and they may have lost them while swimming or fishing, or maybe it was kids that got taken down by big alligators and they lost their necklace. So it could have been a thing of identification, and it could even be the opposite way. Not the opposite way, but it could be, rather than it belongs to like a hunting party or a war party or something like that, maybe it could have been something as simple as you got one of these if you were a woman that, in their terms, but in our terms today, was you got married. So you were spoken for, you joined with a man, and therefore now you wear one of these so everybody knows you're not available. So when you go somewhere, this is a social status sort of thing, or you're letting the rest of the people in the tribe know, I'm taken. You never know what it could mean, but the fact that there's so few of them, but there are enough found, it's not like it's a one-off, right? So it's not like, well, it's us 5 guys that we go out and hunt, so we're going to make it. No, and it could be a group of elite hunters. It could be everybody in the tribe had one, and they were just heirlooms. It could be that they were made and passed down, and that's why they seem like they were heavily sharpened, and it may not be. It may just simply be that they had just seen years and years and years of abrasion just from wearing them. Or some light use if you absolutely had to use one. But because you're not seeing them being resharpened, you're not really finding them broken in context, and there's never been one found and associated with a kill site, but they are found in places where they could be lost. I think this would have been something that was coveted, and you wouldn't be out just throwing it around willy-nilly. But if you're in the river and you're all group fishing and carrying nets, and maybe it gets caught in a net and it just kind of gets yanked and pulled off and it drops in the water, you could lose it that way. You could be swimming along and, maybe have a brain tan tie like this is. Like, I prefer something like brain tan because I did a cordage wrap first, but it's real itchy. So you get like yucca or something on there. I don't much care for that. But the brain tan doesn't bother me, but you know how that is. You soak that long enough, it'll get weak. And maybe you're out there and pops right off, drops in the water, and it's gone. So they're probably very rarely lost, but occasionally they are lost. So I think that's kind of it for the discussion, because we threw out some ideas. We looked at some other ideas. We also let you know what we thought some of the facts were that we kind of know about it. But again, there's very few facts out there. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and maybe we'll come up with another idea or a much better idea, or maybe somebody will come along and say, hey, I've spent a lot of time researching these and I know some stuff about it, and that would be interesting to know. So hey, thanks for following along. Let me know what you think about the idea. What do you think about the Simpson mustache? And hopefully it will catch you on a future building or hunting adventure.